Have you ever had the feeling that someone is digging your grave, but they are the ones who will end up buried before anything else, like this video now? Not because you have to, but because what you are about to hear may change the way you see everything they put you through. And if you felt like this video found you at the right time, comment on the number 22 in the comments. This will be our silent confirmation code. You know arrived here by chance. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, subscribe now. Here, every word carries weight, every revelation has purpose, and you are entering a territory where truth is not just spoken, it is sentenced. Now take a deep breath, because what is about to be revealed is not a simple message. It is the beginning of the downfall of those who touched what was sacred. And you will understand why, in the end, God's silence was never absence. It was strategy. It's not just human courts that conduct trials. There is a court above all earthly authority, where no evidence is withheld, no lie is accepted, and no mask resists the light of truth. When the judge's gavel fails to descend here below, it resonates in the invisible with an authority that paralyzes the spiritual. There is no lawyer to intercede. There is no procedural loophole. There, what speaks loudest is not the alibi, but the intention. Heaven judges not by what is said, but by what was silently thought, plotted in the shadows and hidden behind public smiles. For a long time, those who tried to silence their truth walked the earth free. Armed with lies, strategies, and appearances, they believed they could escape judgment. After all, everything here can be manipulated. But there is a limit to the patience of the invisible. When spiritual justice arises, it comes without warning. It invades time and transforms the invisible into reality. That judgment that seemed distant now manifests as a consequence. And there is no longer any escape, because the verdict was written before the evidence even arrived. This judgment requires no witnesses. It doesn't need recordings, cameras, or confessions. It simply takes place, and when it does, it strikes the soul like silent thunder. What was done to you wasn't lost in time. It was catalogued, recorded, and now echoes as a sentence. What they thought was God's silence was merely strategy, because true judgment begins where human eyes can't reach. And the sound of the sentence isn't heard with the ears, but felt in the collapse of masks. They didn't just want you to suffer. They wanted you to cease to exist, not in body but in purpose. They tried to erase your identity like an archive, believing that by destroying your reputation, they would make the world forget who you are. Lies were told with such zeal that they became truths to the unwary. Plots were hatched behind the scenes, fueled by envy, fear, and a deep desire to reduce you to silence. But they didn't know they were touching something that wasn't theirs. A soul sent with a mission, a purpose established even before time. With each attempt, spiritual fury mounted. Not a fury of human vengeance, but the precise response of a God who does not leave unpunished those who touch his chosen ones. What seemed merely personal persecution was, in fact, a war against the sacred. And this kind of war has a price. The more they tried to erase it, the more light was shed on the injustice. Their resistance became living proof that the invisible was at work. Their survival was the greatest affront to their narrative, and it left them panicked. They were blinded by arrogance. They didn't realize that the invisible was already writing the sentence while they smiled in public. The same hands that attacked you now tremble. The same mouths that slandered you now fall silent. What was sown with such malice has returned as a bitter harvest. They didn't destroy you. They only hastened their own end. And now, what's lit is no longer your pain. It's the flame of justice, burning in response to everything they tried to extinguish. Your mere presence was enough to dismantle a carefully constructed scenario. You didn't need to shout, accuse, or defend yourself. You simply existed. All it took was entering a room for the atmosphere to shift, masks to slip, and discomfort to set in. Because your light exposed the shadows. Your silence screamed truths they'd spent years trying to hide, and that enraged them. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your very essence exposed everything false within them. Their fast depended on the ignorance of others. But your resilience, your peace amidst the chaos, and your continued coherence forced people to look again, to notice the inconsistencies, the holes in the narrative, the glaring contradictions. You weren't the problem, you were the mirror. And those who can't bear to see themselves shatter the reflection. They didn't try to destroy you because you were dangerous, but because you were truthful. And truth, when it enters environments dominated by lies, causes an earthquake. Now the theater has collapsed. The curtains have fallen. The applause has fallen silent, because the one who pretended to be the protagonist has revealed himself to be the villain. And the one they tried to portray as the culprit now emerges as a key player in the revelation of the entire plot. His presence wasn't just a nuisance, it was the sentence. And no matter how much they try to rebuild the scene, the damage has already been done. The truth has been seen. And once seen, it can never be unseen. You weren't placed in their lives by chance. It was a test, a chance, a window of redemption. Not to prove your worth, but to reveal theirs. It was as if heaven said, "Here is a sacred soul. Let's see how you respond." And instead of honoring, protecting, or learning, they chose to destroy. They lied, manipulated, mocked. They stepped where they should have knelt. And in doing so, they sealed their own fate. They didn't realize they were being watched not by you, but by the invisible. Every action, every choice, every word spoken in malice was being recorded as a spiritual test. And there were no excuses. There was no, "I didn't know." The test was clear, the presence was pure, the mission was evident, and yet they chose darkness. And those who choose shadow in the presence of light do not err through ignorance, they err through arrogance. Now they live with the consequences. And they're not punishments, they're harvests. The test is over, the answer key has been published, and there's no way to change the answers. What was done to you is irreversible, but what they did to the sacred now screams to the heavens. What was once an opportunity for transformation has become a sentence of revelation. They didn't fail the test out of incompetence. They failed out of arrogance, and that's the failure the invisible cannot absolve. They thought they were in control. That each step they took was a step closer to victory. They laughed in the shadows, confident in their manipulations. But they didn't realize that, with each move, they were slowly hanging themselves. Every lie told was another turn of the rope. Every hidden betrayal was another knot. And while they thought they were moving forward, they were only climbing the ladder to their own ruin. Justice didn't come quickly, because it was allowing them to dig their own hole, calmly, methodically, precisely. God does not act in desperation. He watches, he waits. He lets arrogance grow until its own weight breaks the structure. And that's what happened. The taller they grew, the more visible they became. The more secure they were, the less prepared they were for the collapse. And that collapse arrived, not like a bolt of lightning, but like an unstoppable truth. The same mouth that mocked now chokes on its own narrative. They weren't destroyed by you. They were destroyed by themselves. And that's what torments them most. It wasn't your revenge, your anger, your response. It was the silence that watched as they prepared their own end. And now, with the rope tightening and their hands shaking, they realized that what they planted was more than evil. It was evidence. And where there's evidence, there's a sentence. And the time for judgment has come. They weren't just jealous. They were desperate. Their ascension, their balance, and their faith triggered within them an uneasiness they couldn't control. And since they couldn't understand where their strength came from, they decided to confront it with tactics they believed were superior. They used words as weapons, orchestrated situations with dark precision, and some went so far as to invoke forces they didn't even understand. They thought they could manipulate the spiritual like a puppet in the service of their desires, but they were playing with something that cannot be played with: purpose. In their eagerness to stop you, they lost their way. They went from intrigue to enchantment, from gossip to spells, from emotional manipulation to invoking forces that know no mercy. But what they forgot is that the ground they walked on was sacred, and that you bore a seal that cannot be acquired. It is granted. And this seal comes with spiritual armor. While they activated rituals, you simply stood by. While they erected false altars, you remained faithful, and this fidelity became heaven's greatest weapon. Now, the battlefield is reversed. They who launched arrows now live as targets. They who tried to control are now being controlled by the same forces they awakened. And in this moment, what seemed like control reveals itself as desperation, because no spiritual war is won without legality. And they never had the authority to touch those who carry destiny. The price they paid wasn't for what they tried to take from you, it was for where they dared to lay their hands. For a long time you wondered, why so much hatred if I didn't do anything to them? And that's precisely the answer. The attack was never because of anything you did. It was because of who you are. You carried a sound, a frequency, a call that activated the spiritual discomfort of those disconnected from their own purpose. Your presence not only exposed, it provoked unrest in souls that preferred the numbness of lies to the pain of truth. And that's why they attacked you. Not because of your flaws, but because of your essence. They reacted as if fighting for their own survival. Not because you posed a physical threat, but because you represented a spiritual truth they didn't want to face. Your light revealed how lost they were, and instead of repenting, they chose to hurt you. What seemed like a human drama was, in fact, a conflict between kingdoms. And in the spiritual realm, touching someone with a mission is declaring war against the divine order itself. They crossed an invisible line, thinking they were simply winning a personal dispute. But now they feel the weight of what they provoked. Because the spiritual doesn't respond with rhetoric, it responds with consequences. The war they started wasn't with you, it was with the plan that sent you, and in this war, every attack becomes a receipt, every word uttered comes back as a sentence, every hidden gesture now becomes an exposure. The attack wasn't personal, but the judgment will be. Because whoever arrogantly challenges the spiritual unknowingly signs their own condemnation. In their quest for power, influence, and dominance, many went beyond what was acceptable. They immersed themselves in secret alliances, contracts of silence, pacts with shadows. They swore oaths on profane altars, believing that far from human eyes they would be protected. They made vows upon their name, promising their downfall as a bargaining chip. And they believed they were hidden. But there is a judge who doesn't need spotlights to see. He sees in darkness as one sees at noonday. And to him, nothing is hidden. What was signed in the dead of night now becomes a cry of exposure, because the spirit world doesn't need paper to prove what was done. It has eternal records. Every whispered word, every veiled intention, every pact made now becomes living evidence. What's more, the pacts themselves have begun to exact a price. Alliances forged on the basis of betrayal begin to crumble. Those who united in the darkness now attack each other in the light, because the spirit of deceit knows no loyalty. The judge never slept. He simply let them dig with their own hands the hole they now sink into. While they swore control, he wrote the sentence, and now what seemed like their victory becomes a revealed tragedy, because pacts made in the dark always have consequences in the light. And the greatest of them is discovering too late that the judge they ignored was the only one who could forgive them. They mocked you when you prayed. They laughed when you said, "God is in control." They called you fanatical, naive, deluded. They said faith was for the weak, for those who don't know how to defend themselves. While you trusted in the invisible, they trusted in strategies. While you prayed silently, they planned as a group. And for a time it really did seem like they were winning. You stood firm, even though you were ridiculed. But what was weakness in their eyes was strength in the invisible. Today, the laughter has ceased. The strategies have failed. The support they once had is gone. And now, hidden behind weary looks and poor decisions, they begin to whisper prayers they once despised. Because when all else fails, only eternal remains. Those who called you a fool now bend their knees. Those who mocked your God now desperately try to reach for some mercy. But heaven cannot be manipulated. It responds to truth, not fear. The irony is that the faith that was once the butt of ridicule is now the only door unlocked. But that door demands repentance, and not everyone can walk through it with wounded pride. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to prove anything. Your constancy proved everything. And now, their silence in the face of collapse is the greatest testimony that the faith they despised was, from the beginning, the only path to salvation. When envy overwhelms conscience, people make pacts with forces they don't understand. That's exactly what they did. In their obsession with stopping you, they went beyond common manipulation. They knocked on the door of the dark invisible, performed rituals, consulted false prophets, and delivered offerings, thinking they could win a spiritual war with dirty weapons. But what they didn't understand is that the spiritual world is not a game, and the price of invoking what you don't understand is being consumed by it. The forces they summoned brought no victory. They brought chaos, and not just upon you, but upon them. Nightmares, mental torment, inexplicable losses, emotional breakdowns. What they called strategy became a personal curse, because evil has no allies, only disposable servants. And now the same mouths that once mocked the light beg for peace in the wee hours. They seek exits where there are no doors. They try to escape a torment they themselves created. You, who remained silent, now watch the collapse without lifting a finger. Not out of cruelty, but because this war was never yours. It was spiritual from the start. And those who meddle with the spiritual without cover reap what they sowed in error. The forces they tried to use against you are returning with a vengeance. And this time, no ritual can erase the trail of destruction. What was summoned has returned to exact its revenge, and it accepts no excuses. They never imagined that their own actions would be the chains that would bind them. By conspiring against you, they thought they were building a path to victory, when in reality they were cultivating invisible prisons. Every lie told, every dirty alliance forged, every act of betrayal planted a seed that germinated silently. There were no sirens, no visible judgments, only the gradual weight of their choices taking its toll. Divine justice doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with precision. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. Today they live suffocated by what they have built. There is no peace. There is no rest. What was once vanity has become shame. What was once ambition has become a prison. The prison is not physical, but it is more suffocating than iron bars. Conscience weighs heavy, truth throbs, and the world begins to see what was once hidden. While you walk free, they stumble over their own steps. The cunningly set traps have become snares around your own feet. Time has revealed everything. Not because you pointed it out, but because the universe itself began to demand coherence. And where there is none, there is collapse. The evil they tried to unleash upon your life has taken root in your own hearts. And now, the growth of this bitter root consumes you from the inside out. Because the invisible exacts its toll and exacts interest for everything done with cruelty and premeditation. You had every reason to fight back. All the pain, all the injustice, all the attacks could have generated an explosive response. But you chose silence, not as a mission, but as resistance. While they awaited your downfall, you chose to remain. While they devised strategies to destabilize you, You decided not to respond, and that was the greatest cry the world could hear. Because in times of hatred, those who remain steadfast without retaliation shine with a light that no one can extinguish. Your calm was an affront to their chaos. Your serenity was a sentence for those who thrive on war. They wanted to see you lose control, sink to their level, confirm the narrative they'd created. But you surprised the invisible and the visible at the same time, not because you remained silent, but because your integrity spoke louder than any accusation. And as time passed, your stance became a testament. People who believed the rumors began to see the inconsistencies. People who doubted your worth began to ask themselves, how is this person still standing? Truth doesn't need to defend itself, it simply resists. And you were living proof of this. The silence they chose to see as weakness was, in fact, their greatest strength. And now, while many cry out for help amid the collapse they created, you carry on, in peace, in truth. Because those who don't soil themselves on the battlefield are those who ascend the podium of victory with honor that cannot be stolen. The world judges what it sees. Cameras show versions, microphones amplify narratives, and social media builds heroes and villains according to emotions. But true justice doesn't need lenses or likes. It begins where no one sees, in the invisible, in the intimate, in the depths. It's there where intentions are weighed, thoughts recorded, and true stories told without makeup. And it was there that his fight began, where no one saw, but everything was recorded. While they built an image, you built a journey. They nurtured versions of you, but you nurtured roots that didn't need approval to grow. What no one knew was that heaven was watching everything, not with eyes of criticism, but with eyes of justice. And what was seen up there began to manifest down here, not in the spectacular way they expected, but in the most powerful way possible, the truth imposing itself, silent and undeniable. Today, cameras may continue to point in various directions, but they can no longer hide what has become obvious. The trial that began in secret now invades the public, and no amount of editing can distort it, no amount of discourse can hide it. Because when justice comes from the invisible, it doesn't need a stage. It simply happens and changes everything. They plotted your demise with precision. They thought through every detail, who would leave you, what they would say, how you would fall. They created plots, spread rumors, and set the stage for your downfall. But what they didn't realize is that this stage wouldn't be used for your humiliation, but for their exposure. Because when God flips scripts, he doesn't just change the ending. He transforms the entire plot into a spectacle of justice. The stage set for your downfall has become the screen of truth. The lights that were turned on to highlight your mistakes now illuminate their contradictions. The rehearsed lines become jumbled. The applause dies down, and the audience begins to realize that the villain was not who he seemed. You, who were cast as the guilty party, now shine as a survivor, not for having won with brute force, but for having resisted with truth. The performance is over, and the plot they wrote for your destruction now serves as a document for your acquittal. The most impressive thing is that you didn't have to change a single line of the script. You just remained who you were, and that was enough to turn everything around. What was supposed to be your end became the beginning of their collapse. And there's no rewinding, because when justice takes over, what was covered up becomes the main scene. Many wondered where God was while you were being attacked. In fact, perhaps you asked yourself that question. The silence seemed cruel, the delay seemed unfair. While you wept, the guilty laughed. While you fell, they rose. But what no one understood, and what you will understand now, is that his silence was not absence, it was strategy. God was not absent. He was constructing a verdict that would leave no doubt. He allowed them to reveal themselves completely, to go too far, to sink into their own decisions. Not because he approved of evil, but because he knew collapse would only come with sufficient evidence. And while this was happening, he strengthened you silently. He healed internal wounds, planted your feet, and made you grow where no one saw. When everyone thought you were forgotten, you were being prepared. And when everyone thought they were in control, they were being watched. Now the time for exposure has arrived. And with it, the revelation that silence was never abandonment. It was strategic positioning. God remained silent so that no one could say it was you who caused their downfall. Now everyone sees, and no one can say it was manipulation, because it's clear you remained, they fell, and what seemed like divine absence was, in fact, a perfect plan in execution. Justice didn't come late. It arrived precisely at the moment when it can no longer be denied.